In Unit 2, we'll talk about the material in Chapter 3. I will give you a few charts here in just a moment on that material. Basically, it's the chapter on starting a small business, some of the ideas that we have to look into there or that we consider as we start a small business. So we'll get into that here in just a moment. One other thing about Unit 2, we'll be starting the work on our first case study. And your job is to present a case analysis. I'll talk some more about that just a little bit later on.
Let's get into Chapter 3 now and look at a few topics here. This discussion should support pretty well the reading assignment that you have for Chapter 3. So let's get started on this. We're talking about starting a small business, and we're going to look at kind of a systematic approach for how you can explore ideas and take a more or less an analytical way of deciding what kind of small business you want to start. So the first challenge is to come up with startup ideas, and obviously you've got to be able to identify opportunities that you might have some interest in, new products or new services that you think might lead to a promising business. You got to look at the same time, be looking for unnoticed business ideas that nobody else is doing, but that there is a market for. And then you want to look for business ideas that serve market needs, that customers desire, that customers will have products that they know about, that they can afford. And all of the above. I personally like to say I don't want to be involved in a business that's not contributing to the betterment of the people around me or the betterment of mankind, if you want to get broader. So just remember this, a good idea is not always a good opportunity, and you see this all the time. People are constantly coming up with good ideas, but after you do the investigation and do the analysis, you find out, well, it may not be a good opportunity. So let's look at some of the motivations we have for starting a business, particularly if we are going to be creating a new business from scratch. One motivation is to develop a market for a new product or service. Another one is to just purely want the challenge and the independence of running your own business. Another one is you want to tap into some unique resources that are available that nobody has recognized yet. Or you may want to just start a business that does the job better than one that is currently doing it. So there's a lot of reasons, a lot of motivations for starting a business. Just a lot of times people just want independence. They want the thrill of creating something new and creating useful products and serving the markets. So our text defines three types of startup ideas: a type A, a type B, and a type C. A type A business, and recognize this is a classification that is pretty unique to the text. I won't be using this classification as we go forward. We'll identify the startups by what they really are. So a type A from the text is centered around providing customers with an existing product that's not available in the market. So it's a new product that's going in the market. A type B startup involves new ideas or new technologies centered around providing a new product. And a type C are ideas that are centered around providing customers with an improved product. So let's look a little further now into these ideas. Type A is new market. Type B is new technology. Type C is new benefit. So an example of a type A would be a new age beverage for entering into that very specialty market that has exploded here in this country, and I guess worldwide. So you could come up with a new age beverage product that would be a new market. A new technology, a type B, would be using, for example, high-tech computers to develop a simulated helicopter ride. I don't think that's a big challenge nowadays, based upon some of the remote control toy helicopters that I see in the stores nowadays. But Anyway, the idea of developing simulators for aircraft and helicopters has matured a lot and is pretty common. So you might see that as a commercial ride that somebody might want to offer. So that's a type B idea. Type C idea would be a new benefit. So you have new market, new technology, new benefit in these three ideas. The example the text uses here is developing a personal misting device to keep workers cool as a new benefit. Now, if you sit and think about these for a little bit, you'll come up with probably a number of ideas of your own, just based upon your own exposure and your own passions, your own ideas right now. So what are the common sources of startup ideas? Well, if you look at the first two bubbles there, the first one is prior work experience, and the second one is personal interest / hobbies. Those two right there account for about 61% of new ideas. So it's safe to say that that where you're working right now, or some of the work experiences you have, or your hobbies, are the best place to look for new ideas, particularly if you've been working in areas where you quote unquote are passionate, where you are doing things that you're passionate about. One thing that you're going to hear most people in entrepreneurship say is that you want to do things that you're passionate about. You want your new business ideas to be something that you're passionate about. And so most of the time we're pretty passionate where we work. We're learning new things. We may not like the boss, we may not like the company, but we may like the product, the technology, and so forth. Or I may have a personal interest or hobby that I've been working on for years and years. It's now time to convert that into a business. So those are just some common areas for common sources for startup ideas. You look at the rest of the bubbles there, you'll understand all of those. Is it just a chance happening, or is it a suggestion, or so forth? I went to an entrepreneurship conference here recently, and in that conference there was a guy speaking who with a partner had started a small company developing new types of audio devices that are relatively cheap and very easy to make portable. And this guy said that in his previous job he had to travel a lot, and he was tired of carrying around large speakers for his iPod and his computer. And so he and a buddy developed a new set of foldable speakers that makes it much easier for traveling with. And so that started their idea, and that was their idea, started their company, and now they're branching into all kinds of audio devices. So that's kind of the way those things happen sometime, a personal interest or a hobby or just a chance happening. Now, this is a topic here that I'm pretty high on, and I want to explain to you why. I have a fundamental philosophy that says the greatest ideas emerge during the times of greatest change, and that can be either changes in a down economy or changes in an up economy. It really doesn't make any difference. If you look right now, for instance, everybody would say the economy is a down economy. It's not growing very rapidly. It looks like it's not going to grow very rapidly. And so things must not be very good for entrepreneurs. Well, that's just not true at all. What we're seeing is we're seeing more innovation and more creativity come out than perhaps we sometimes see during up markets. There's a lot of entrepreneurial activity stirring around. And so let's look at a couple of these change factors here. Some industry level or enterprise level factors would be the unexpected, the incongruous, or the process needs for structural change. And you have little definitions there on the right-hand side of what each one of those are. The unexpected is what it says it is. It's unanticipated events, and they can either lead to your enterprise succeeding or not succeeding. Process needs would be current technology is insufficient to address an emerging challenge. I'll give you a good example of that right now. There's a big push now to develop alternative sources of energy. And of course, the sun is one of the best sources of energy if we can just figure out how to capture the energy in sunlight. And so you see the solar cell manufacturers are really pushing hard to try to get the current technology, which is not sufficient to address the market, to a point where it is sufficient to address the market. And so that's a good example now of something that we're all aware of that needs some process changes. Structural change would be changes in technology, markets, etc., that alter industry dynamics. We're seeing a structural change begin to unfold right now in the healthcare markets. This is going to be a result of the passing of the Obamacare law. And you're going to see all kinds of changes taking place on the market side and on the business side. We're going to see, in fact, we're already seeing new businesses emerge that allow us to accomplish or to provide health care in new and very innovative ways. And one of the ways is doing remote diagnosis and remote treatment to a certain extent. So if you look over on the human economic factors side, you see changes in demographics can cause changes in entrepreneurial opportunities. That's happening right now. You're seeing it in a couple of areas for sure. In the aging U.S. population, you're seeing a lot of new markets emerge that's aimed primarily at older citizens. You're seeing a really steady growth in the number of Hispanics or Hispanic background individuals in the U.S. population. And so you're seeing new markets open up there that's aimed primarily at that culture or at that population. Then we have new knowledge. We have changes in perception. You know, perceptual variations determine product demand. I heard a good way of saying this yesterday, and that is, everybody wants what everybody wants, and nobody wants what nobody wants. Those are changes in perception. We perceive something as being something that we really like. It becomes in demand. Everybody wants it. We see something that's perfectly good product that we don't really like, and nobody's buying it, and so nobody ends up wanting it. It's a good way of summarizing that changes in perception. And perception tends to be reality. Now, there's always changes, new knowledge emerging, and there's a lot of new knowledge emerging all the time, primarily in the area of the internet and social interaction on the internet and how we utilize that social interaction. There's a lot of changes taking place there right now. We're seeing new companies pop up everywhere in that area. I mean, who would have known just a few years ago that we would have major new companies popping up that do nothing but measure how many times an internet site gets hit and reports that back to the owners of the site. So we have companies that do nothing but that. How many of us would have thought there would be a business market or a market that provided enough business to have a company that does nothing but optimize database searches? And so, or search engine optimization is what that market is called. Ran into a guy yesterday who has started a new company that does nothing but search engine optimization, SEO it's called. And so we see all kinds of new knowledge-based ideas popping up. So we just have to be aware of those as we move forward. So here's a good little chart right here that you can use for kind of a checklist if you're interested in becoming an entrepreneur or starting your own company. Here's some ways to kind of go through a list of ideas to get you to thinking about how do I look for business ideas. For example, number one says borrow ideas from existing products and services or other industries. There's not a thing wrong with taking an existing product, improving that product, or even taking it to the next level and entering the market with a new product. You combine two businesses into one. Or you can begin with a problem in mind. Identify a problem that we have right now, and then try and think about what could I do to create a product or service that would help solve that problem. And so you can go on down the list. This is a good little list right here that you can use if you're planning on starting a business. Now, we're going to talk a little bit now about something we call outside-in analysis, and then another term that you might guess is coming, an inside-out analysis. We're going to talk a little bit about how you can approach business ideas from that standpoint as well. So an outside-in analysis says I'm going to study the context of a venture or of a market or of an industry to identify and determine business ideas that qualify as opportunities. And so what we're beginning now is kind of a systematic way of parsing through ideas and parsing through potential opportunities. So first I would look at the general environment. I would look at take a broad business area that I'm interested in, look at a general environment, and start to look at all of the factors that influence that environment. Look at an industry environment where I might perhaps combine forces and be able to go after my competitors. I might look at the competitive environment. What is the focus from a competition standpoint? Is there strong competition? Is there not strong competition? And so forth. So in the outside and in analysis, I'm taking a general environment. I'm trying to narrow down to an industry. I'm looking at that industry environment. I'm looking at all of the factors in that environment that I can, particularly the competitive environment. And then I just keep moving right along and narrowing that down to something that I might eventually come up with as an idea. That could be kind of like searching for a needle in a haystack. So one thing that I want to do with the general environment, remember that we're going to start with the general environment. I want to look at the political, legal environment. What's technology looking like? How is society and culture changing? What's the global environment? What's the demographic environment? What's the economic environment? All of those are very important, high-level environments that we have to give some thought to if we're trying to find an idea that we want to generate or build a business out of. Now let's look at market attractiveness, because as we look at new ideas, what we're really thinking about is there a market for this idea? If I could provide this solution, or if I could provide this product, or if I could provide this service, is there a market? Is there an attractive market? And so one way I can do that is to go through this list of 5 topics right here and look at how that looks. Is there a threat of new competitors? Is there a threat of substitute products or services? Is there already an intense competition going on? What kind of bargaining power do the suppliers have in this market? And what kind of bargaining power do the buyers have in this market? And those 2 questions really address two totally different market conditions. The first one says, what is the bargaining power of suppliers in the market? That says that if I've got a market that its principal suppliers are very limited in number, that means the market bargaining power of those suppliers is going to be high. If I have a market where there's lots of suppliers, it's a broad market, it's a growing market, but it's a very competitive market, then I have to address the question of what is the bargaining power of buyers. In a very competitive market, the buyers can really impact the market, the price of the product or service that you're trying to sell. Let's go back up to that middle one there, intensity of rivalry among existing competitors. How would you like to be trying to enter a new smartphone product into the marketplace right now? You're talking about intense rivalry. That is intense right there. Lots of people in the market. Lots of capability being offered. The buyers have a lot of influence right there. And so that's one you have to think twice about before you might want to enter into that market. Well, what's the competitive environment? We look at the market now. What's the competitive environment? If I were to enter the market tomorrow with my new idea, who would be my competitors? And what do they control in the market? Any unique resources that they control? What are their strengths and weaknesses and so forth? I can ask all of those questions there, but I want to look at the competitive environment. I was once hustling business in the Soviet Union, which now has broken down into Russia and a bunch of other countries. And I discovered the fact that the Russians have a pretty good natural supply of diamonds. They have some pretty good diamond mines in Russia. And so the Russians were going to generate their own diamond industry and get into the diamond market worldwide. And this was probably 10, 12 years ago that I discovered this. And the Russians are yet to get into the worldwide diamond market. Well, why is that, do you think? Well, if you do a little research, you'll find out that the diamond market is basically controlled by one company worldwide. And that company works primarily in Africa, in the African diamond mines, and supplies diamonds to the major markets in the world. In fact, if you go to Tel Aviv, Israel, you will see the largest diamond exchange in the world located in Tel Aviv, Israel. Well, how did that happen? Well, historically, diamonds have come out of Africa. Historically, Israel, where Tel Aviv is located, has been a major route for trading. And so over the years, the trading centered in that area. And so now it's the largest diamond exchange in the world. Well, where are the Russians in all of this? They've been kept out. They've been shut out because of the control of the market by basically one very, very large company and the people who are affiliated with it. So let's look now at, that was kind of a summary of outside in. Let's look at inside out analysis. What we want to do now is look at the ability of the firm to compete in the bigger market. So what kind of resources do you have? Do you have good material resources? Do you have good human resources? Do you have good facilities resources? All those things that go into the resource column, you want to check that and see what do you have or what is it going to require. And then you want to look at capabilities, and this ultimately goes back to your equipment and your people, and I believe your people, because ultimately the quality of a company rests on the shoulders of the people in that company. And I will tell you that this is almost a guaranteed fact, that the people in the company will reflect the character, the integrity, the personality, the competitive spirit of the owners of the company. It's a company culture that emerges that way. And so you look at your capabilities, and then you look at your core competencies. What kind of capabilities do I really have? What kind of core competencies do I have? Where am I really an expert at what I do? And so those are kind of the three initial broad areas that you begin to look at when you're doing an inside-out analysis. So all of this now comes down to doing basically a SWOT analysis. A SWOT analysis is an inside-out analysis. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. I'm going to show you a table in just a little bit. There's a good table, a good example for you to use if you do SWOT analyses as you're putting together your business plan. So basically we're integrating internal and external together, and so we end up with a SWOT analysis, but we're also trying to get really competitive insight. What is the competition like in the marketplace? Will the opportunity that I see now lead to others? Will the opportunity build skills that allow you to leverage into new markets? And will pursuit of the opportunity be likely to lead to competitive response by potential rivals? And you'll see that a lot, particularly with small companies that enter into what at the time is a niche market, and then later on larger companies find out, hey, this niche market is growing, I'm going to become a part of it. And so now if I'm operating in that niche market, I may have some competition all of a sudden that I didn't anticipate having. So here's the table I was telling you about. This is a good model for a SWOT analysis. Inside the company are strengths and weaknesses, and outside the company is opportunities and threats, and we integrate those to try to determine what is our real potential here. What should our strategies be for how we proceed forward? This is a good table to use going forward for you. Whether you're going to do a SWOT analysis for your business plan or not, you may do a SWOT analysis later on. This is something you got to carry in your personal notebook and say, okay, I know exactly what format it is that I want for my SWOT analysis. So I take my inside-out analysis, and I take my outside-in analysis, and I look at my personal experience and my passions and my skills and my unique capabilities. That's my inside-out analysis. And I look at my general environment, the industry environment, competitive environment, and where those two overlap is where my area of greatest opportunity will reside. So we're sitting here talking about this in just a few minutes, but what we're really talking about is an analysis that can go on for a year or two, where you're really digging and really trying to decide where is my sweet spot, where is the area where my outside in analysis overlaps with my inside out analysis, and that's really where you want to be with your company. So once I've done that, then I'm able to build, in this little diagram here, I'm able to build a kind of my foundation based upon my outside in and my inside out analysis. I found out where my sweet spot is. This is going to be my foundations, and now I begin to develop. Once I kind of decide where I'm going to be, I begin to develop my strategy options, and I can have a whole lots of different strategy options, either ranging from cost-based strategy to a differentiation-based strategy, and there are others here that we'll see here coming right up. So what is a strategy? It's defined as a plan of action that coordinates resources and commitments of an organization to achieve superior performance. That's what I did when I was in the industrial world as a corporate VP. I was responsible for developing our company's strategic plan. And what were the strategies that we would be developing going forward, that we would be employing 3, 4, 5 years or longer in order to grow our business. And so we would spend a lot of time exploring that all the time, coming up with all kinds of ideas. Most of the time, as in this analysis here, what you've really done is you build off of your core strengths and passions, your core talents, strengths, and passions. And that then allows you to establish your initial strategies, and then you take your succeeding strategies and build upon that one, build on the strengths that you're developing. So then a strategic decision is regards the direction a firm will take in relating to its customer and competitors, and this is a definition. And a sustainable competitive advantage. Take note of this one now, because this one will for sure show up on one or more exams. A sustainable competitive advantage is a value-creating industry position likely to endure over time. And so remember that as we go forward. A sustainable competitive advantage is simply an advantage that you create in the marketplace that allows you to endure over a long period of time. So let's look at the different types of strategies that we might think about. They range anywhere from a broad-based strategy to a cost-based strategy to a focus strategy to a differentiation-based strategy. Those are the three major areas of strategies, and we'll talk a little bit about these as we go forward. So let's look at a focus strategy just for a second. A focus strategy means that you're going to focus on a subset or a smaller group of customers. You're going to emphasize maybe a single product or a limited number of products or services. In other words, you're going to focus on your strengths. What are the things that we do really well? We're going to focus on that. We're going to limit the market to a single geographical region, perhaps. We're not going to try to go worldwide or nationwide. And we're going to concentrate on the superiority of our product or our service. And so a focus strategy means exactly what it says then. What I'm trying to do then with the focus strategies, I want to create some advantages, and then I want to look at the disadvantages of that market as well. The advantages of the focus strategy is I can create a niche market, or I can find a niche market. A niche market is one that is a small market, requires a focused product or service, and there's not very many players there because of the size of the market. If I can jump in and grab that market or create that market, then sometimes those can be very, very valuable for a small company and allow you to grow your company and build a fair amount of wealth. So niche markets are very nice. Typically in a niche market, you're applying some unique expertise or some unique technology that nobody else is doing. That gives you the market advantage. A focus market can go away if all of a sudden competitors decide that market's good for me too, and then all of a sudden I'm no longer in a niche. I'm sitting there where I was operating with nobody else bothering me yesterday. Today I may have 2 or 3 competitors sniffing around getting ready to try to steal that market. If a demand disappears or the segment erodes, that niche goes away, then your company's probably going to struggle. If the segment's narrow, if the niche gets very, very, very narrow to where there's not enough money or your product can't really fit it, then that's going to be bad news for you. And the other thing that could occur is that companies come in and do basically a sub-niche or a sub-segment of that niche. They come in and try to steal just a portion of the niche, combine that market with a market they already have, and basically cut you out in what you're trying to do. So you have to be careful with focus strategies and niche markets as well. So now you got to ask yourself the question, is my startup idea feasible? Can I really make something out of this startup idea? And so then I began to look at all the market factors. Do I have a competitive advantage? What's the attractiveness of this industry, of this product, of this service? Right now, if you were going to start a new oil company, then there's kind of a shadow over the energy business, the traditional energy business nowadays that our government has helped create. And so you'd have to ask yourself some questions there. Do I really want to fight that? And then you've got to look at your capabilities, your management capability and your personnel capability. Do I have the talent on hand to do this job? Now, lastly, you got to do something that people hardly ever do, and that is I've got to stand back and honestly ask myself the question, what are the fatal flaws in my plan? What's the 1 or 2 things that if they were to occur, I would be out of business? And then you have to assess those to see what that risk is with respect to whether you want to tackle it or not. So is your startup idea feasible? You've got to look and do the feasibility analysis. Here's the definition for it. You've got to look at fatal flaws. What could happen in my market or in my competition or with my cost or my own capabilities? What could happen there that would cause me to really blow this opportunity up? And so you've got to look at all those things. Is it feasible to do what I'm trying to do? So here's a feasibility analysis framework. I like this framework, by the way. You start at the macro level, you go up to the micro level, and then you look at kind of a detail of the new venture that you want to start. What are your missions? What are your aspirations? What kind of risk are you taking? What are the success factors? Do I have the personal connections that I need in this marketplace? I've forgotten now which market it was, but I was thinking of one the other day, and pardon me. I was thinking of one the other day, and I thought, hey, this would be a great market to get into. And then I stepped back a little bit and said, oh, you've got to really have good personal connections to get into this marketplace. Hey, I'll give you a good example of that. If you're going to try to get into the media market, certain portions of those markets, certain segments of those markets, you've got to really know who the players are if you're going to get into those markets. And it would be tough for somebody who knows nothing about it to get into it. So this structure right here gives you a good structure for doing a feasibility examination of your new idea. So these are some of the things we just talked about: the industry attractiveness and the management capability. All those things you need to really, that's kind of the macro level. You need to understand those as you move up in that framework. Now, let me say this concludes our presentation on Chapter 3. Do all the work you got to do in Unit 2, and then we'll move on to Unit number 3 and Chapter 4 and 5 next.